The Diviners by Margaret Laurence, published in 1974. The Diviners is the story of Morag Gunn. We meet this woman. She is a somewhat successful novelist. She lives on a farm. There is a little river that goes by outside her window. She spends her days looking at the river, trying to write her new novel, but mostly she is completely preoccupied with reflecting upon her life, which did not start very auspiciously. When she was a little girl, both of her parents died from, I believe it was typhus. She was adopted by a couple who could not have any children, who were, how do I put it, a little peculiar. Her foster father, Christy, he is the local scavenger, as everybody calls him. Basically, he's the local junk man. He has a horse and a cart. He goes around the town collecting people's rubbish, and he takes it out to the local dump. And of course, he goes through it looking for treasure. And one of the first comments in the book is how she was looking through a photo album that vaguely had a stink about it. And she knows that the reason for this is because it was one of the treasures that her foster father scavenged from the nuisance grounds. It's hard enough being an orphan, but then to be adopted by the local junk man, all the children are pointing their fingers and saying, "Oh, the junk man, there's the junk man. He stinks and he wears those overalls every day of the year." Her foster mother, Prin, P-R-I-N, short for princess, is a big fat woman who likes to eat donuts. And she likes to go to church on Sundays because she likes to hear the music. And she is simple-minded. So poor Morag has these two people raising her. The junk man and the very slow-witted Prin. So her early childhood is not too easy. And of course, there's a lot of good stuff in the beginning of the book because, you know, a lot of that childish anxiety. She feels very self-conscious because she's one of the tallest children in the classroom, taller than most of the boys. You know, if you're a boy, it's great to be the tall one, but if you're a girl, you know, it weighs on her quite heavily. She also has poor vision. She's short-sighted, but she doesn't want to wear glasses because she already feels too self-conscious about her height, as well as the fact that the clothes, the dresses that Prin makes for her are these old, frumpy clothes made by an old woman. Prin is not an old woman, just her mind is not very clear. She has quite a lot against her, but she's smart, and the teachers tell her, and they tell her that she has a talent for writing and creativity, which sustains her through her life. The story is mostly taking place in the past. The entire novel is Morag looking at her life from childhood to where she is today. Now, where she is today is as I said, moderately successful novelist. Morag has an 18-year-old daughter, Piquette, and she's a little bit wild. This was a bit difficult for me because I was wondering if she was properly wild or if she was wild in the way that young people seem to be in 1971, 1972. Like her young teenage daughter, 18, has been hitchhiking across Canada with her boyfriend, Gord. And of course, her mother, Morag, worries about her terribly. However, because of the way Morag has lived her life, unconventionally, let's put it that way, she lets her daughter go as she pleases. She worries about her, but she doesn't want to, well, she doesn't want to say no, and she doesn't want her to lose her freedom. So it's quite a dilemma. Isn't it amazing how young people used to be so wild and free compared with today? Like you've got all these kids just hunkered down in front of screens constantly, clicking the mouse, playing the game, collecting the gold coins. So Morag slowly goes through the stages in her life. When she was a teenager and she went to university and she left. Where did she grow up? She grows up in this small town called Manawaka. She eventually leaves. She goes to the University of Winnipeg. She's taking some English literature courses. She falls in love with her professor. They get married. They move to Toronto. They live there for a while. And eventually, well, I don't want to give too much of the story away because that part of the novel did come as quite a surprise to me. But I guess you know that if it's within the first half of the novel and you've still got 300 pages to read, well, things might not be smooth sailing. So the novel is quite well told, this epic scope of a woman's life, how she became a novelist, the troubles, the trials, the tribulations that she has had to endure to get to where she is. And even though it seems that she's quite successful where she is, she's still beset by anxiety, mainly in the form of her daughter. How can she be the guiding mentor to her progeny? The author. This is wonderful. I love reading this part about Margaret Laurence. Margaret Laurence was born in Neepawa, Manitoba in 1926. Maybe just quickly go to Google Maps and look for Neepawa. It is absolutely the nowhere of nowhere land. Like, Manitoba itself is not all that much. Sorry, everyone in Manitoba, but, you know, come on, do something out there. And Neepawa is really just the nowhere zone. Like, you could not go to a more isolated, small town place. Margaret Laurence was born in Neepawa, Manitoba in 1926. Upon graduation from Winnipeg's United College in 1947, she took a job as a reporter for the Winnipeg Citizen, very much mirroring the character Morag's gun life. Morag Gunn, born in the small town, Manawaka. She went to the University of Winnipeg and she got a job as a reporter for the local news. Here's where it gets really good. From 1950 until 1957, Laurence lived in Africa, the first 2 years in Somalia, the next 5 in Ghana, where her husband, a civil engineer, was working. She translated Somali poetry and prose during this time and began her career as a fiction writer with stories set in Africa. Maybe Somali language is very easy to learn and pick up, but I doubt it. She really must have thrown herself into absorbing this new language, this new African language, Somali. God, in the 1950s, can you imagine anything more different? Imagine being born in a small Canadian village to suddenly be flung halfway across the world to be living in Somalia because your husband is an engineer. When Laurence returned to Canada in 1957, she settled in Vancouver, where she devoted herself to fiction with a Ghanaian setting in her first novel, This Side Jordan, and her first collection of short stories, The Tomorrow Tamer. Her 2 years in Somalia were the subject of her memoir, The Prophet's Camel Bell. Separating from her husband in 1962, Laurence moved to England, which became her home for a decade. The time she devoted to the creation of 5 books about the fictional town of Manawaka, patterned after her birthplace and its people. The Stone Angel, A Jest of God, The Fire Dwellers, A Bird in the House, and The Diviners. Laurence settled in Lakefield, Ontario in 1974. Her many honors include 2 Governor General's Awards, that's the highest literary award we have for Canadian literature, and fiction, and more than a dozen honorary degrees. Margaret Laurence died in Lakefield, Ontario in 1987. So this is the Manawaka Series, 5 by Margaret Laurence, Canada's most celebrated novelist. I bought this. I kind of wish I hadn't because, you know, it's a collector's item, and I don't collect books. I read them. And these books, I won't read them because I'm afraid to ruin them. So I would really like to sell this to someone, but, you know, the cost of the shipping is going to be outrageous. Anyway, if you're interested, please let me know, because it is a nice collection. So here's the first one, The Stone Angel. Well, that's the last one, The Diviners. That's the one I just read, the one I'm reviewing today. Rich, powerfully fascinating, the novel of an independent woman in her urgent need for love. I don't know if that's 100% accurate. The Fire Dwellers, her poignant novel of a woman searching desperately for new love. That's nice because that's set in Vancouver, and I can kind of see the similarity there to actual real Vancouver. A Bird in the House. This one is actually a collection of short stories, but the short stories are like the chapters of a novel. I read this one last year and I really enjoyed it very, very much. Her stunning account of a passionate prairie childhood. And this one, A Jest of God. I think this is one of the first book reviews of Margaret Laurence that I ever did. Her moving novel of a woman searching for love. Source of the acclaimed motion picture, Rachel. I didn't know that. If you're interested in buying this from me, like, I'll sell it to you for $30, but you've also got to pay the shipping, which is not going to be insignificant. So the first one is The Stone Angel, and that's absolutely this is my favorite Canadian novel. I love this novel. This is the most heartbreaking novel you're ever going to read. And a lot of these novels are similar in a way. All 5 of them, they're based on one woman who comes from this village of Manawaka. I should know the name of the main character. They all have peculiar names. Hagar. Hagar is a 90-year-old woman reflecting on her life, and she's just the most pig-headed, stubborn old fool that you will ever meet in literature, but you love her because she knows the way she is. Like, I think at the beginning of the novel she says she's 90 years old and she decided to start smoking because she knows it's going to annoy her son and her daughter-in-law, who she lives with. And by the way, this is her second son, who knows quite well that he is not her favorite son. So right away you have this horrible dynamic of this woman who's just like poison, but she can't help herself. Like, she can't help it that he is not her favorite son. And she can't help the fact that she wants to smoke because she knows it upsets everyone. However, it's better than being ignored and unnoticed. If you're interested in reading Canadian literature, this is the best of the best. I have not read a Canadian novel that is better than this one. Number 2 is A Jest of God, and this one is really quite sad. So all of these women in these novels come from Manawaka. And the woman in this one, Rachel Cameron, she never left Manawaka, and she became a school teacher there. She lives with her mother, who dominates her life. And because she lives with her mother, she could not leave Manawaka, and she takes it out on the school children that she is in charge of. You feel so bad for this woman because she's really trapped in this very narrow life, and then she enjoys beating the children so violently, and you think, oh God. But you know, that's how she gets it out. Very, very sad, this one. Now, The Fire Dwellers, all of these are independent novels. You can read any of these novels in any order, and there's not a thread that unites them, except that they come from the same tiny village. But the woman in The Fire Dwellers is the sister of the woman from A Jest of God. And she lives in Vancouver. She escaped from Manawaka. She's married to her husband, and she drinks too much. Like, there's a part close to the beginning of the book, I always remember it, where she takes her children to the kindergarten, and she goes home and she has a glass of wine, and she goes into the basement to tidy up, and she finds her old record player, and she has another glass of wine, and she puts on one of the records, and she finds some of her old clothes from when she was young. So she puts on her old clothes and has another glass of wine, and she's dancing, you know, and looking at herself in the mirror, like remembering when she was young. And then she gets too wasted to go and pick up the children from school. You know, I think the first time I read that when I was young, I just couldn't believe something like that could ever happen. And now that I'm a bit older, unfortunately more familiar with alcohol, I can see how that could happen quite often. Very, very good. She's also looking for love, even though she seems to be quite fulfilled. Bird in the House, as I said, short stories but connected. It's a novel, but it's written in short story form. And finally, this one, The Diviners. I have not read The Diviners for years, and I thought that this was going to be the massive, explosive culmination of these 5 novels. And sadly, I didn't enjoy it very much. I thought it was a bit annoying, a little bit tedious. Woman reflecting on her life. She's worried in the present. She's worried about, oh, she doesn't have enough time to write the new novel because she's always worried about her daughter. And then she goes back and she ruminates on her sad upbringing. You know, we have her initial fumbling attempts at romance. We have the woman who marries her university professor. It seemed excessive. I have to say the novel felt a little bit self-indulgent. And I'm really sorry to say that. And I was a bit surprised to feel this way because I really wanted to love this novel. I was actually telling myself while I was reading it, no, it's not self-indulgent. It's not, well, perhaps we could remove this entire chapter, but let's say that it's all necessary and that it's, you know, it's one of those grand explorations of character development. But when I finished the novel, I did feel, yeah, it was bloated. It was excessive. I have the feeling that all of the bits that didn't get put into the other 4 books, which are quite sharply written and there's no excess, all of the stuff that she cut out from the first 4 books somehow found their way into this book, because there was, you know, these excessive scenes. There's a scene where a man comes over and he knocks on the door. He's a real scumbag. Her daughter's just a child at this point, and he knocks at the door and he says, hey, I got a bottle of rye whiskey here, you want a drink? And she says, oh, I know I should say no to this man because he's, you know, dirty and filthy and I know what he's after. But come on in anyway because I'm lonely. I really did not love that one scene. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel here. Is she so desperate for physical and emotional contact that she will just say yes to anyone? Is she an alcoholic? Is she a woman who's very free in her, you know, sexual proclivities, that she, yes, okay, if it's there and it's hard, then I want some? Or are we supposed to feel that she grew up without a real mother and father, that now she's kind of broken inside, and so she will say yes to any male figure who appears in front of her? And the bit with the daughter, the hitchhiking hippie daughter, I didn't enjoy that too much. And there's a lot of excessive stuff that I think sometimes, you know, when a novelist becomes famous and very highly regarded, the editors of the novels are a bit afraid to say, you know, I think we should cut this because it's pointless and it doesn't do anything. Like, this novel is very, very long. It's like 483 pages. And here on page 432, like, we're 50 pages away from the end of the book. Like, she's looking at a book of wild flowers and she likes the names of these flowers and she begins to read them to people. Curly pondweed, silver hairgrass, old witchgrass. Look at that. All those. It doesn't do anything for the story at all. She's just opening up an encyclopedia saying, my, look at all the funny names, and writing them down for us. Like, the book's nearly over, Margaret. Don't go into these wild diversions like that. It's so, like, it's worthless. You're not giving me anything there. You're like a silly old fool telling stories that go nowhere and do nothing. And you think they're entertaining, but you put everyone else to sleep with them. Like, something like that, I think an editor needs to come along and say, wildflowers do have funny names, but we don't need to list them in your 5th book in the series, do we? So I was disappointed. It is still a good book. It's just that it's not as good as the other 4. Yes, we get a very clear picture. Yes, I do feel like the woman in this novel is like a real flesh and blood person. I can believe these stories happen to someone. 500 pages of it seems too much. Like, it should be 350 pages max, and it would make a cleaner, sharper narrative. I'm a little bit upset that I'm saying these things because I really wanted to love this one. I thought this one was going to be the big, gorgeous finale. And it was the weakest one in the entire series, I'm sorry to say. All right, book lottery. If you support my channel on Patreon for $5 a month or more, you can get your name into this jar where I will shake it up and pull out a name, and I will send you the book that I'm reviewing. This is a nice copy. I think you'll be happy to get that. And you'll get a copy of my magazine, The Friend from Budapest by Grant Shipway, which has 3 of my short stories that have been published, so they're very good, and 1 poem that was also published. I'll send you that. That will be number 41 out of 100. I only had 100 printed. So, collector's item worth thousands of dollars in the future. You'll be happy to have that and pass it down to your relatives, your ancestors, and they'll keep that, and that will be worth a fortune one day. With that beautiful cover designed by a friend of mine named Andrea, very talented artist in Budapest. So, who is going to get that? Okay, I don't know his real name, but his name is Poon Dog, P-O-O-N-D-O-G, Poon Dog from Sweden. So, Poon Dog, please write me an email at grantlovesbooks@gmail.com. Send me your mailing address. I'll mail you this. Sorry, I always feel a bit bad sending a book that I'm not, you know, just positively gushing over, but it's very good. It's very Canadian. It could be a bit shorter, but I still think it is worth your time and effort to read. However, I think you should read all the other ones first. I'll send you this. This is fun. This is my writing. All right, Poon Dog. Thank you very much for your support on Patreon, and thank you everyone for your support on Patreon. And if anyone wants to buy this, what did I say, $30? $30 for, you know, these books. And please buy it, because like, I've moved apartment a couple times and I think it was, like, I'm gonna ruin it if I have it much longer. I think it's nice, a little bit rustic, but you know, that's Canadian style. It's always got to look a little bit like it came from the cottage. I feel so disappointed. I picked up this book thinking, all right, Canadian writer who I love, probably my favorite Canadian author of all time, and I just wasn't as crazy about The Diviners as I was all of the other books. It's still good, it's just that, you know, you get a bit let down when it's not as good as the other ones. Have a great day. Take care. What's an honorary degree? Well, they give those to famous people, right? I mean, Dan Aykroyd has honorary degrees. Fucking Dan Aykroyd.